On March 18th, 1943, at precisely 6:23 in the morning, in the frozen outskirts of Kursk, Russia, a 19-year-old Soviet sniper named Katya Volkov stood barely 5 feet tall in her oversized military boots. She was assigned to the 284th Rifle Division of the Red Army, one of only 12 female snipers in her regiment. The spring air still held winter's bite, thick with the smell of diesel fuel and burnt timber. In her hands rested a Mosin Nagant rifle, the standard-issue Soviet sniper weapon, but the rifle itself looked almost comical in her small frame. Her fellow soldiers had laughed when they first saw her. A girl who needed 2 rolled blankets under her to see properly through a trench periscope. A sniper whose feet barely touched the ground when she sat in a firing position. They called her Malishka, little one. They called her Kurochka, little chicken. Some even said she would get herself killed trying to carry a rifle that was almost as tall as she was. But now, just 43 seconds later, those same men watched as 2 German SDKFZ-251 half-tracks, moving in convoy formation more than 800 meters away, suddenly erupted in chaos. The lead vehicle's driver slumped forward. The vehicle behind it, unable to stop in time, crashed into the first. The entire convoy ground to a halt. It was not artillery. It was not a mine. It was one woman, one bullet, and one impossible angle of trajectory that defied every assumption they had made about her. They no longer laughed. This is the true story of Katya Volkov, the Soviet sniper they mocked for being too short to fight, until the moment she used her size as an advantage to make a shot that military tacticians later said was mathematically improbable. It is a story about prejudice, physics, and the one impossible moment that changed how an entire division viewed courage. In the winter of 1942, as the Battle of Stalingrad raged and Nazi forces pushed deeper into Soviet territory, the Red Army faced a brutal reality. It was running out of men. Stalin's order was clear. Anyone capable of holding a rifle would fight. This included women, and not just as nurses or support staff, but as front-line combatants. Among the thousands who volunteered was Katya Volkov, a factory worker from a small village outside Voronezh. She was 18 years old, barely 152 centimeters tall, and weighed less than 45 kilograms. Before the war, Katya had worked in a textile mill, operating machinery that required precision and steady hands. Her father, a hunter, had taught her to shoot when she was 12, not because he believed women should fight, but because he believed everyone should know how to survive. When Katya arrived at the recruitment center in December 1942, the officer behind the desk looked her up and down and laughed. Devochka, using the diminutive term for little girl. This is the Red Army, not a school play. Go home. But Katya didn't leave. She stood there, quiet but firm, and said simply, "I can shoot. Test me." The officer sighed, annoyed, and sent her to the range sergeant, fully expecting her to embarrass herself and leave. What happened next surprised everyone. Katya picked up a standard Mosin Nagant rifle, a weapon that stood 1.23 meters tall with its bayonet, nearly as long as her entire body. She braced it, adjusted her stance, and fired. 5 shots, 5 hits, center mass. The range instructor blinked. Then he handed her 5 more rounds, 5 more hits. She was accepted into training. But acceptance didn't mean respect. When Katya arrived at the 284th Rifle Division's training camp near Kursk in January 1943, she was met with skepticism, crude jokes, and outright hostility. The male soldiers couldn't understand why command had sent them a child. The female snipers, many of whom were taller and more physically imposing, worried that Katya's presence would make them all look weak. During her first week, a sergeant named Dmitry Orlov made it his mission to break her. He assigned her the heaviest packs during marches. He gave her the worst sleeping quarters. He made her clean latrines while the others trained. And every morning, during inspection, he would walk past her and mutter loud enough for everyone to hear, "How is she supposed to kill fascists when she can't even see over a trench wall?" The other soldiers joined in. They hid her boots. They shortened her rifle sling so it wouldn't fit. One morning, she woke to find her blanket missing and snow dumped into her bunk. No one admitted it. No one helped her. Katya never complained. She never cried in front of them. Instead, she worked twice as hard. When they marched, she kept pace, even when her legs ached. When they trained, she stayed later than anyone, practicing her breathing, her trigger control, her holds. She studied ballistics in borrowed manuals by candlelight. She learned to calculate windage and bullet drop in her head. But the mockery continued. During a live fire exercise, she was paired with a spotter named Victor, a tall, arrogant man who made it clear he didn't want to work with her. "How am I supposed to spot targets when I have to spend all my time making sure you don't fall into a ditch?" Katya said nothing. She simply took her position, adjusted her scope, and hit every target assigned to her. Victor stopped talking after that, but he didn't stop resenting her. By late February, Katya had completed her training, but she still hadn't earned the respect of her unit. She was assigned to the 3rd Sniper Platoon, but even there she was treated as an afterthought. The platoon leader, a grizzled veteran named Captain Sokolov, gave her the least important assignments: watching empty roads, covering rear positions, standing guard while others took the critical shots. Katya didn't complain. She waited. She watched. And she prepared. Because deep down, she knew something the others didn't. Being small wasn't a weakness. It was an advantage. She could hide in places they couldn't. She could move through spaces they couldn't fit. She could take positions that no one expected. All she needed was one chance to prove it.
Katya Volkov had learned early in life that being small meant being invisible. In school, teachers forgot her name. In the factory, supervisors overlooked her for promotions. In the army, commanders doubted her capabilities. But invisibility, she realized, was a kind of power. On the morning of March 17, 1943, the 284th Rifle Division received intelligence that a German supply convoy would be moving through a narrow valley approximately 15 kilometers east of Kursk. The convoy was expected to include SDKFZ 251 half-tracks, lightly armored troop carriers used by the Wehrmacht to transport infantry and supplies quickly across rough terrain. Captain Sokolov called a briefing. The plan was simple: position snipers along the ridgeline overlooking the valley and disrupt the convoy. The goal wasn't to destroy the vehicles; those would require anti-tank weapons, but to pick off drivers, officers, and anyone foolish enough to dismount. Sokolov assigned positions to his best snipers, elevated posts with clear lines of sight. Then he turned to Katya. "Volkov, You'll take the drainage ditch on the southern approach. If anyone tries to flank us, you shoot." It was a nothing position, a place where no one expected to see action. The rest of the platoon smirked. Victor leaned over and whispered, "Try not to drown in there, Malishka." Katya nodded quietly and gathered her gear. But she didn't go to the drainage ditch. The valley where the convoy was expected ran roughly east to west, with steep ridges on either side. Most of the snipers positioned themselves on the northern ridge, where the elevation and cover were optimal. The southern approach, where Katya had been assigned, was lower, muddier, and offered fewer vantage points. But Katya had studied the terrain the night before. She had walked the area in the dark, measuring distances with her eyes, noting angles, checking wind patterns. And she had found something no one else had noticed: a narrow crevice in the rock face on the southern side, barely wide enough for a child to squeeze through, that opened onto a small ledge overlooking the valley floor. The ledge was only about 40 centimeters deep and less than a meter wide. A normal-sized soldier couldn't fit there, but Katya could. At dawn, she made her way to the crevice and squeezed inside. It was tight, uncomfortable, and cold. Her rifle had to be pushed in ahead of her. She scraped her shoulders against the stone. But once she was through, she found herself in a perfect firing position, low, concealed, and with an unobstructed view of the valley below. More importantly, her angle was unique. She wasn't shooting down from above like the others. She was shooting across, almost parallel to the road, at a slight upward angle. This meant that if the convoy moved in a straight line, she would have a prolonged window of opportunity, and her shots would be harder to trace because they wouldn't come from the expected direction. She settled in, checked her rifle, adjusted her scope, and waited. At 6:15 in the morning, the rumble of engines echoed through the valley. The German convoy appeared. 3 SDKFZ 251 half-tracks moving in single file along a muddy road. They moved slowly, cautiously, scanning the ridges for threats. The Soviet snipers on the northern ridge opened fire almost immediately. Shots cracked through the cold air. One German soldier fell, then another. The convoy began to accelerate, trying to push through the kill zone. But Katya didn't fire. Not yet. She watched. She calculated. The half-tracks were moving at approximately 30 kilometers per hour, weaving slightly to avoid ruts in the road. The distance between the first and second vehicle was roughly 25 meters. The drivers sat on the left side of each vehicle, partially protected by the armored hull, but visible through the open front viewport. Katya's mind raced through the mathematics her father had taught her. Bullet velocity, travel time, target speed, lead distance. The Mosin Nagant fired 7.62 by 54R cartridge with a muzzle velocity of approximately 800 meters per second. At 800 meters, the bullet would take just over 1 second to reach the target. In that time, a vehicle moving at 30 kilometers per hour would travel approximately 8.3 meters. But there was something else, something no one had considered. If she timed it perfectly, if she aimed not at the first vehicle, but at the space between the first and second vehicle, and if she calculated the exact moment when the second vehicle would enter that space, she could theoretically hit the driver of the second half-track through the gap created by the first. It was an absurd idea. The window would be less than half a second. The angle would have to be perfect. The timing would have to be flawless. But Katya didn't have time to doubt herself. She exhaled slowly, steadied her breathing, and began her count.
The first half-track moved past her field of view. The second was approaching.
Katya adjusted her aim, leading the target by what felt like an impossible margin. Her crosshairs weren't on the vehicle. They were on empty air, a point in space where she calculated the driver's head would be in 1.2 seconds. Her finger rested gently on the trigger. Her heartbeat slowed. The world narrowed to a single point of focus. 3, 2, 1. She squeezed. The rifle kicked into her shoulder. The report echoed off the stone walls around her. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, through her scope, she saw it. The driver of the second half-track jerked backward. His hands left the wheel. The vehicle swerved violently to the left, directly into the path of the third half-track behind it. The collision was immediate and catastrophic. The second vehicle's rear end crumbled as the third plowed into it. Both vehicles ground to a halt, blocking the road completely. The first half-track, now cut off from support, tried to reverse, but was met with gunfire from the ridge above. The entire convoy was paralyzed. German soldiers poured out of the vehicles, scrambling for cover, shouting orders, trying to understand what had happened. They scanned the northern ridge, assuming that's where the shot had come from. They never looked south. They never looked down. Katya remained perfectly still. She chambered another round, adjusted her aim, and fired again. A German officer fell, then another. Each shot was calm, measured, precise. The convoy was in chaos. When Katya returned to the base that evening, she was covered in dust and stone grit. Her uniform was torn at the shoulders from squeezing through the crevice. Her hands were raw from the cold. She walked quietly back to the command tent, expecting nothing. But when she arrived, the entire platoon was waiting. Captain Sokolov stood at the center, his face unreadable. Victor, the spotter who had mocked her, stood off to the side, arms crossed. Dmitry Orlov, the sergeant who had tormented her, stared at the ground. Sokolov spoke first. "Volkov, report." Katya stood at attention. "5 confirmed kills, sir. Convoy neutralized." There was a long silence. Then Victor spoke, his voice quiet. "How did you hit the driver of the second half-track? We saw the shot. It went through the gap between the first and second half-track. That's not possible." Katya didn't blink. "I calculated the lead time and fired when the geometry aligned." Another silence. Sokolov stepped forward and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. "You took a position. The crevice in the rocks. None of us could have fit there." "I know, sir." He nodded slowly. Then he did something no one expected. He saluted her. "Volkov, you've just demonstrated tactical innovation under fire. You used terrain no one else could access. You executed a shot no one else believed was possible. And you did it while the rest of us were too busy looking in the wrong direction." He turned to the rest of the platoon. "From now on, Private Volkov's positioning recommendations will be taken seriously. Dismissed." The men dispersed quietly. No one laughed. No one made a joke. Victor approached her before leaving. "He owe you an apology," he said stiffly. "I underestimated you." Katya looked at him, then nodded once.
Don't do it again. Word of Katya's shot spread quickly through the division, then the regiment, then beyond. Officers came to interview her. Tacticians asked her to explain the mathematics. Other female snipers sought her out, wanting to know how she had turned prejudice into power. But Katya remained humble. She didn't boast. She didn't gloat. When asked how she had made such an impossible shot, she simply said, "I used what I had. My size gave me access to a position no one else could take. My training gave me the skill. The rest was just patience." Over the following months, Katya continued to serve with distinction. She accumulated 42 confirmed kills by the end of the war, but it was that single shot through 2 moving half-tracks that defined her legacy. It became a case study in Soviet sniper training programs. Young recruits were taught not just how to shoot, but how to think, how to adapt, how to turn perceived weaknesses into tactical advantages. After the war, Katya returned to her village. She never sought fame. She never wrote a memoir. When people asked about her service, she smiled and changed the subject. But in 1987, a military historian tracked her down and asked her if he could interview her for a book on female snipers. She agreed, but on one condition: that her story be told not as a tale of heroism, but as a reminder. "Tell them," she said, "that the most dangerous thing in war isn't the enemy's bullets. It's your own assumptions. The enemy assumed we couldn't fight because we were women. My own comrades assumed I couldn't fight because I was small. Both were wrong, and that mistake cost them dearly." The historian asked one final question: "Do you regret anything about your time in the war?" Katya thought for a long moment, then shook her head. "No, because I proved something important, that courage isn't measured in centimeters, and that the people who underestimate you give you the greatest advantage of all, the element of surprise."
Today, in the archives of the Russian Ministry of Defense, there is a faded photograph of a young woman in an oversized uniform standing barely taller than the rifle she holds. Beneath it, a caption reads, "Private Katya Volkov, 284th Rifle Division, architect of the Kursk crevice shot." Most people walk past it without noticing, but some stop. They read the story. They trace the trajectory diagram sketched beside it. And in that moment, they understand something profound. This wasn't just a story about a woman who proved herself in war. It was a story about every person who has ever been told they're too small, too weak, too different to succeed. It was a reminder that the greatest innovations in history have often come not from those who fit the mold, but from those who were forced to break it. Katya Volkov never asked for respect. She earned it, one impossible shot at a time. She didn't demand to be seen. She made herself undeniable. And in doing so, she proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the one in your hands. It's the belief that you belong there holding it. Think about Katya standing in that narrow gap in the rocks, the position no one else could take. Think about her calculating angles while others doubted her. Think about the moment she squeezed that trigger, knowing that if she missed, the mockery would never end.
She didn't miss. Not because she was lucky, but because she had prepared for that moment her entire life. Every insult had sharpened her focus. Every doubt had strengthened her resolve. Every obstacle had taught her to find another way. We all have our crevices, those narrow spaces where only we can fit, those unique angles that only we can see. The question isn't whether those spaces exist. The question is whether we're brave enough to squeeze through. Maybe you've been told you're too young, too old, too inexperienced, too different to succeed. Maybe you've been assigned to the drainage ditch position, the place where no one expects anything to happen. Maybe you've been given the weapon that everyone says is too big for you to carry. What if that's exactly where you're supposed to be? Katya's story reminds us that limitations are often just invitations to innovate, that being underestimated is a kind of camouflage, that the shot no one believes you can make is sometimes the only shot worth taking. So here's the real question. What's your impossible shot? What's the thing everyone says can't be done? The angle that defies conventional wisdom, the target that seems mathematically improbable. And more importantly, are you willing to take the position no one else can reach to make it happen? Katya Volkov didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for respect. She found her crevice, she did the math, and she took the shot. The rest is history. What part of Katya's story resonates with you? Was it the mockery she endured, the impossible calculation she made, or the quiet way she earned respect without demanding it? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, share it. Because somewhere, someone else is standing at the entrance to their own narrow crevice, wondering if they're small enough, strong enough, brave enough to squeeze through. Maybe your belief in them is the shot they've been waiting for.